Hello again, vinyl community. It's Matt. How are you doing? I'm back for another video. Well, this one I hope you'll really enjoy. I'm not sure how many of you have been following my channel since I first started, but if you go back to my very first video, it's still up, or if you go back about halfway, scroll down all my videos, you'll see one that was inspired by, I believe it was me, Mr. Mayo. It started a thread about Beatles albums that mean something special to you. And it was a very emotional video for me when he asked us to do that video, because when I did it, I really got into this topic quite heavily. And you can go back and check that out if you want. I got a little bit weepy in that video, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I have no problem with showing my emotions nowadays as I get older. But anyway, I thought I would do something special today as it relates to those two videos. And it goes to the fact that I owe a lot to my parents, and particularly my father, for sparking my love and interest in music in general. Listening to music, playing it a little bit. I'm not much of a musician per se. No, I can't sing a note. I've tried. I'm just not that good at it. But as a musical person, a person who loves music, who's passionate about music, who's a Beatlemaniac, I guess you want to call it. Beatles are my favorite, have always been since I was a little boy, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And to this day, I don't think there's a day goes by, folks, where I don't listen to some form of music, whether it be on the stereo, whether it be in my car, whether it be on Spotify, on my on my telephone with earphones, whatever, all this technology. But I don't think a day goes by or has gone by in most of my life where I don't enjoy at least a few minutes of some good music that I love. And I'm sure many of you feel the same way. And I owe a lot of that to my parents, both my parents, but especially my father. My parents were not musical people. Neither one played a musical instrument. Neither one were really great singers or considered themselves to be great singers. But they had a passion and a love for music, for popular music as they got older. And they passed that on to their children, and I have now passed it on to my children and my children's children. I have one grandson. And I have to thank my parents for that, especially my dad. And I keep saying especially my dad is because he was the one. Mom was into music. She liked to dance when they put on the stereo, put records on the stereo player or have people over for cocktail parties or whatever, and she would dance and enjoy modern, popular music that was out at the time in the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s. But my dad was the one who bought the albums. He worked in Boston, and he used to at least be within a fairly close distance to a store called Jordan Marsh. Maybe some of you have heard of Jordan Marsh. Let me real quick tell you, Jordan Marsh was to Boston as Macy's would be to New York City, if that makes sense, okay? Macy's, New York City, Jordan Marsh, Boston. That's the way it was. And they had a great record department, a really elaborate record department at the time. This is back in the days when the larger department stores had record departments, and they were huge, and you could get everything there, and just fantastic. I miss those days. And he would come home a lot with albums, with a new album for my parents and himself to listen to. And every once in a while, as I told you in my two videos, go back to my first video about Meet the Beatles and go back to my video about Beatle albums that mean something special to me. Every once in a while, he would come home with an album for me. I'd go into that a little more in those videos. But one of the first albums my parents ever got for me, and my dad got this for me in Boston, I believe, was the Meet the Beatles album. And it's a wonderful album. It's the thing that sparked me getting into the Beatles. It got me dancing and bopping on my toy spring horse, and to this day I thank them. This was the first one. This was the first album anyone ever gave to me that was mine and that I could enjoy, and I thank them for that. I thank my parents, especially my dad, for picking it up. So, I had that when I was a little boy, age 3. I do have memories of the 60s of listening to albums like this in the house as a very young child, 3, 4, 5 years old. This was a big one during the holidays. To this day, I can't listen to this album without thinking of being a little kid during Christmas at my house. And there's several other albums like that too. There's the Ray Conniff one, Christmas with Conniff, and there's another Ray Conniff Christmas album I don't have handy, but any of those albums are played, I think of being a young boy at home, because these albums were played incessantly, and this is a great one. My parents, along with listening to popular music and my dad picking up popular music at Jordan Marsh and bringing it home for the family, him and my mom in particular, they also listened to like stuff like Ray Conniff. They had a big Ray Conniff collection. I don't still have all their Ray Conniff albums. I only have a few. Through the midst of time, you know, things have been lost, and I'm not able to show every album in their popular music collection today, but I do have this one. Ray Conniff, I Write the Songs, goes back to the mid-70s or so, and they had at least 20-something Ray Conniff albums. They were into it, you know, really into Ray Conniff. Along with the Beatles, I remember albums like this being played in the house in the 60s when I was a little tiny boy. You know, Mary Poppins. My parents took me to see this movie when I was very young. They took me to see Help in '65. And this is the kind of stuff that I remember being played in the house. Well, what I'm going to show you right now is I went through my dad's record collection. And I pulled out popular music that he had brought home from the store for him and my mom to listen to. Maybe there was something piqued their interest, maybe there was a song they liked, maybe the album as a whole had a cool sound. My dad is, you know, very much from that era. He was born in 1930, so he graduated high school in 1948. My mother was born a year later in 1931. So they were brought up teenagers, high school years during that Glenn Miller, Dorsey Brothers era, the big bands, the crooners, you know, Frank Sinatra and all that stuff. So they were into that kind of music, a lot of brass, you know, big brass bands and that stuff. So I find that a lot of the music that he was bringing home of popular music had some brass in it, or had just a good groove to it, and he seemed to like that, and both my parents seemed to enjoy it. So I'm going to there's too many for me to go through each one. I may make a comment or two about each one, but this pile that I'm about to show you real quick, one after the other, is from my father and mother's, and certainly my father. I have to keep stressing that because he was the one who would buy these things and bring them home. Maybe my mother requested them, but he went and picked them out and he bought them. Anyway, every one of these is an original. These are from his actual record rack. I went through it. I couldn't take everything out. Some that I do remember are missing. I don't know what happened to them, but I have a bunch here to show you of his actual records that were my father and mother's. Okay, the first one is from 1975. 1975, the Bee Gees, Main Course. This was the prequel to all the big stuff that came a year or two later with Saturday Night Fever in 1976-77. This is their 1975 album with Jive Target and Nights on Broadway is on it. And really remember hearing that in the house. All these albums I remember so well in my house. Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Okay? Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Okay? Big album. I know every song on that album. This is from his collection, Guitar Man. Bread. Some of them are going to look a little beat up, like I said. He didn't put them in sleeves and plastic and all that like we do now. Chicago's second album, Chicago 2. You can see the ring wear on it and everything. Okay. Again, brings back a lot of memories. These are his records, and boy, they bring back memories. Chicago's first one, Chicago Transit Authority. Look at all the wear on it. Jim Croce. He was really into Jim Croce. He bought at least 2 of his albums. I have 2 I can show you. That one's Life and Times, and this one is I Got a Name. Oh, actually I have 3 of them here. He really must have liked Jim Croce because he bought 3 of them. This is You Don't Mess Around with Jim. You're noticing as you see these albums, a lot of them are either from the late 60s or early to mid 70s. Was their peak record buying years for my parents as they got older. When they were in their mid to late 30s and into their early to mid 40s is when they were really into buying popular music albums. It seems kind of old, doesn't it? I mean, being born in 1930 and yet here we are in the late 60s, early 70s, so my dad's, late you know, 38, 39, 40, early 40s, and he's buying, you know, stuff by Jim Croce in Chicago and that. I mean, a little older, I would think, right? But, you know, give him credit that he was buying this stuff. He had this in his collection, John Denver's Greatest Hits. This is a cool one I thought he had. Earth, Wind, and Fire, the best of. Probably one of the later albums he bought. I'm not sure what year this one came out. Maybe some of you know. I want to say this was more the later 70s, right? But, so maybe he was still buying them then. I remember gazing at this album cover all day when I was a kid. I don't know if you can see it. Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy by Elton John. He didn't have many by Elton. He didn't have Goodbye Yellow Brick Road in his collection. He might have had Elton's Greatest Hits. I couldn't find it though. I do remember him having Elton's Greatest Hits, the first one. But he also had this, and there's so much detail on Captain Fantastic. There's Bernie Taupin and the Brown Dirt Cowboy. And I remember just looking at all these images and drawings and paintings and being so amazed by it and looking at the album cover. I used to look at all his album covers and see what they were all about. That's a pretty cool one. He had a couple by Carole King. Again, a lot of wear on this. This one's so famous. Any of you that are from that era like I am, older people, you know Tapestry. One of the most famous albums of the 70s, or maybe of all time. I think at one time it was the biggest selling album of all time. And then he must have bought her follow-up to Tapestry, because here's, I believe it's her follow-up, Rhymes and Reasons. Again, it's dirty. It's got some dirt on it and wear, but still have it. This one my mother used to love. Doesn't have any personal information on here, but you can see my mother's first name was Louise, I can tell you that. And she wrote on it, "I love this record!" Exclamation points. Louise, 1970, and she underlined "for the love of him." She must have really liked that song. I don't know if you can see that, what she wrote on it. Bobby Martin's With Love. And, you know, I look at these albums and look at the pictures and the imagery, and they're implanted in my mind because as a young boy, I was 8 or 9 when this came out and was in our house, and brings back so many memories. It's funny because, you know, my parents now, it's just, my dad's 88, going to be 88 in August, I should say. He's 87, he'll be 88 in August. My mother is 87 now, she will be 88 in January. You know, if any of you watch my videos, you know that as your parents get older, and mine certainly have, they've gotten more ill and have had more health issues. My dad's hanging in there, he's doing well, he still drives, gets around. Unfortunately, my mother's had a stroke several years ago, so she's more incapacitated. It just makes you sad, because when I look at things like this album and I think back to my parents listening to it together and enjoying it, and my mother really loving that song by Bobby Martin, and it still sticks in my brain, and it makes you kind of melancholy and nostalgic for those days, because you just say, geez, where's the time gone? You know, there was a time when I was the little kid and the adults were the adults, and they were listening to their music and Bobby Martin and Carole King and Chicago and whatnot, and I was the little kid, you know, in the house, and the cousins would come over and the aunts and the uncles, and now most of them are all gone. I mean, it's just my parents pretty much the only ones left from that era, you know. And well, look at me. I'm on the backside of my 50s here with a grandchild. So, but anyway, I don't mean to get too nostalgic on you folks, or a little bit melancholy here, but boy, as I look at these, these are the actual ones that they had, and it brings back a lot of nice memories. It really does, a lot of memories. This was very popular back in the day in the 70s, Loggins and Messina. I think this had the big hit on it. Yeah, Your Mama Don't Dance, and Your Daddy Don't Rock and Roll, or something. Yeah, this was played in the house a lot. He liked this one. He liked Willie Nelson, but I think he got this in the later years. This might have been from the earlier 80s even. He's still in the shrink wrap and everything. Willie Nelson, always on my mind. It's got the hype stickers on it and everything, as you can see. And he's got Willie Nelson's Stardust, which I haven't really listened to some of these. I should get into them, but this one supposedly is a very good album. Willie Nelson Stardust. This was big, played around my house in the early 70s. Nilsson Schmilsson. Oh my goodness, they used to play this all the time, especially my dad. He really liked this album. Wow. And I love it too, I have to admit. I have it on CD myself now, and I love it. Every time I listen, every song on here is implanted in my mind from being that little kid listening to it with my parents. And he picked up this one also. He must have liked Nilsson enough that he tried this one. Don't know much about this one, but it was in his collection. This was a cool album. The original and most famous Billy Preston album, the one that has Will It Go Round in Circles, I believe is on. Yeah, Will It Go Round in Circles is on here, and I thought Nothing from Nothing Means Nothing is on here too, but anyway, it's one of the most famous Billy Preston albums. He does a version of Blackbird by John and Paul. Yeah, it's a cool album. It's the only Billy Preston one in my dad and mom's collection, but there it is. Billy Preston, Music Is My Life. Okay, he had one Santana I remember seeing, and this is it. I think this is their first album. As you can see, it's all worn, ring wear and everything. But this was, I just remember this cover, looking at it and being amazed by it when I was a little kid. There's the band, including a young Neil Schon, who later went on to Journey with Greg Raleigh. Who's Greg? I think, no, that's the drummer. Greg's over here, Greg Raleigh from Journey. I didn't know it at the time when I was a little kid, but now you learn, right? Santana's first album from my dad's collection. It's funny, this one still has the Jordan Marsh sticker on it. It says right on it, Jordan Marsh. I don't know if you can see that. I'll try to get... Anyway, Leo Sayer, Endless Flight. I think it came out around 76 or so. Had a lot of hits on here. You Make Me Feel Like Dancing When I Need You. This is like his big, top 40 hit album. Leo Sayer, Endless Flight. Still in the Shrink from 1976. He had this big Sinatra anthology. It's called Sinatra Trilogy. I put it in a plastic sleeve. I wanted to protect it because it had that silver foil-like look to it, so I did protect it for him and put it in plastic. This was a big one in my house. I cannot listen to this album without thinking of the old days, being a little kid in the early 70s, and this was being played. Sly and the Family Stone's greatest hits. They'd have people over and be dancing, and again, they were in there, like I said, late 30s, maybe early 40s, and yet they were into this kind of stuff. They were buying it. He was definitely into Cat Stevens, Catch Bullet 4, T for the Tillerman, again, all originals. I used to like this album when I was a little kid because I used to like the song Everything Is Beautiful, and they had this album. Here it is, Ray Stevens, Everything Is Beautiful. And I was an Andy Williams fan as a little kid. They had some Andy Williams. I'm not showing that stuff today, but Andy, there's a picture of Andy with Ray Stevens. Ray Stevens was kind of Andy's protege, from what I understand. But this, I remember liking this album when I was a kid. Joe Tex, I Gotcha. Who remembers that song? That was probably his only top 40 hit, but original album. Dad picked up at Jordan Marsh. He, more than my mother, was a big Three Dog Night fan. He liked Three Dog Night, so he bought Harmony. This has Old Fashioned Love Song on it, I believe. And he got the one called Naturally, which had like a little folding poster on it, which has been long ripped off. Yeah, over the mist of time, it's gone. There was like a little folding cover backing to this. I don't know what happened to it, but Three Dog Night. Only a couple more, folks. He had Barry White's Greatest Hits. I keep saying had. They're right here. Here they are. These are the originals. Barry. He actually had a copy, and here it is, of Who's Next. Now, in a lot of cases, my cousins may have influenced him. I have older cousins who are a few years older than me, and sometimes, they would they were close to my parents, and they might have told my dad or mom about a certain album. You got to try it. So my dad might have bought it for that reason, but he did have this. This was part of his collection. Who's next? This one got a lot of spins. I remember a lot of the songs on this. Big, massive collection here, and it came with an extra 45 in it with like 2 or 3 albums, I think. Oh God, I don't even remember. No time now, but anyway, Stevie Wonder, Songs in the Key of Life. Original copy right here. And as I said, it came with the 40 little extra songs on the 45 inside. It's like 2 or 3 albums long with a booklet. Real thick, big set. Almost there. They had the Youngbloods. Remember the Youngbloods? People get together. Alright, cool. And I remember this being played a lot, along with Godspell, but I couldn't find his Godspell. But he had Godspell and he had hair. Go figure. Alright. Again, all part of my parents' pop music collection. So that's it for that. But I want to show you, you might be saying, well, did they have anything Beatles related, Matt, besides buying you Meet the Beatles? And I think you bought me Beatles 65 and Something New, and a couple of those when I was a kid. He'd buy them at Jordan Marsh and leave them on my bureau so I'd find them in the morning when I get up. And yes, they did have 2 Paul McCartney albums in their pop music collection. They had this one, Paul's first solo effort. And I know for a fact my cousins turned him on to this because my 2 older cousins were really into this album in 1970 when it came out. They loved it, and they were pushing it hard on anybody who would listen. And I'm sure they influenced my parents to pick it up. And then I acquired it. Now it's part of my collection. And the last one they had, and it still has the Jordan Marsh sticker on it again. See it? Jordan Marsh. Wings at the Speed of Sound. Still in the shrink with a little sticker on it here. Yeah, that sticker's right on there. And there it is. So they did have a couple of Paul albums. And that's it, folks. So again, I hope you enjoyed this little journey with me looking at some of my dad's and mom's original pop music. And as I look back on it, as I said, brings back a lot of memories, a lot of nostalgia. Makes me long for the good old days when everybody was younger and healthier and we were all together and everybody was here with us. I'm sure all of you feel the same way about your families as well. We all can relate in that way. But it also teaches me and shows me of where I got my musical foundation. A big portion of my musical foundation was through my parents' love of music and buying popular music and hearing it in my house, and certainly getting me some Beatle records didn't hurt either. So there you go, folks. I just hope you enjoyed this little journey down memory lane with me, looking at the actual records my dad bought and owned with my mom. Take care, God bless, and I'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.